Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome back to the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. And you're here because you like your history with a little mischief, a little mystery, and occasionally a man who solves problems with his fists and a truck.
Before we leap out of the aircraft, quick call to action. If you're enjoying the show, please hit subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. It seriously helps the podcast grow, like more than you'd think.
5 stars, not 4.5, not I'm being honest, not I'm a tough grader. 5. It helps other listeners find us, and it keeps this whole weird history machine humming.
Also, remember, all our episodes are evergreen. We're not chasing headlines. These stories stay relevant because humans keep being human. And if you've got a topic you want us to cover, message us on social media.
And new merch is live. There's a link in the show notes. Dress like a person who knows obscure military history at parties.
Today's episode is about a man who is simultaneously a war hero, a chaos goblin, and the kind of legend that seems too cinematic to be real. Robert Blair, Paddy Mayne. And don't forget to stay tuned after the episode for the original song, Ghost of the SAS.
If you've ever heard of the SAS, like the real SAS, not the I do burpees, therefore I'm Special Forces SAS, Paddy Mayne is part of that origin story. He's one of the early giants. Also, one of the early liabilities.
That's the perfect way to describe him. Indispensable and terrifying.
We are going to talk about who he was, how he became one of the most feared raiders of World War II, what made him tick, and why he remains controversial, even among people who love special operations history.
And we're going to do it the only way we know how.
With banter and emotional damage.
Okay, set the scene. Early 20th century Ireland. Paddy Mayne is born in 1915 in Northern Ireland. He grows up in a world that's already complicated, politically, socially, everything. But here's the thing. From early on, the stories paint him as big, not just physically, though he was that too. Big energy.
Big don't start none, won't be none.
Exactly. He's smart. He goes to Queen's University Belfast, studies law, and he's also a gifted athlete. Rugby. And not, I played rugby once and got a bruise. I mean serious rugby, top level. Which matters, because rugby culture at the time is like a forge. Toughness, teamwork, aggression, controlled violence.
Controlled in theory.
In theory. And Mayne may not have read the controlled memo. The consistent thread is that he's intense, charismatic, and prone to sudden eruptions.
One of those guys where everyone likes him, right up until they're the one in the blast radius.
And then war breaks out. He joins the British Army, becomes an officer. And early in the war, there's this hunger for something new, because the traditional rules, the traditional methods, aren't always working. So you get these experimental units, these raiding forces.
Enter David Stirling, the mad visionary.
Stirling, yes. A towering Uncle Scotsman who essentially says, what if we stop playing by the rules, sneak behind enemy lines, and smash their stuff?
Smash their stuff is a technical term.
It becomes the core idea of what will become the Special Air Service. The early SAS in North Africa is tiny, scrappy, and high risk. They're not trying to take and hold ground. They're trying to disrupt, destroy aircraft on the ground, sabotage fuel dumps, hit supply lines, create confusion. A small number of men trying to have an outsized effect.
Like the world's most violent prank channel.
Exactly. And Paddy Mayne steps into this world and fits like a key in a lock or like a lit match in a room full of gasoline.
Now, the thing about Mayne is that he's not just a participant. He becomes one of the defining personalities. There are guys who are brave, there are guys who are skilled, there are guys who are wild. Mayne is all of those at once, and the combination is alarming.
Let's talk about why. First, he's physically fearless. Not, I'm courageous. More like, I don't appear to feel the same risk signals as the rest of us.
The man's danger sensor is set to silent.
Second, he can lead. People follow him. Even when he's leading them into something that sounds like a terrible idea, they go because they trust him. And in a unit like the SAS, where everything depends on initiative and nerve, that kind of leadership is gold.
Third, he has a very personal relationship with violence, which is where we start drifting into the darker part of the story.
Yeah, because the myth of Paddy Mayne is heroic, but the human reality is more complicated. There are accounts of him being kind and generous, and also accounts of him being brutal, even by the standards of men at war.
War doesn't create monsters out of nowhere, but it can definitely hand someone a microphone and a spotlight and say, "Go ahead, be yourself."
North Africa is where the legend really grows. The SAS in those early days is striking deep behind Axis lines, and one of the most famous tactics is driving in at night, often in modified jeeps, racing across airfields, firing at planes and fuel depots, tossing explosives, and then vanishing into the desert.
It's fast, it's loud, and it's absolutely unhinged.
And it works. Not every time, and it's not clean, but it works enough that the concept proves itself. The enemy is forced to divert resources to guard rear areas, airfields, depots, roads, things they'd rather assume are safe.
That's the whole point of raiding. Make them feel unsafe, everywhere.
Mayne becomes known for his aggressiveness on these missions. He's not the guy who waits for the perfect moment. He's the guy who says, "We're here, we do it now."
Which is great when the mission clock is ticking. Less great when you're trying not to die.
Now, to understand Mayne, you also have to understand the early SAS culture. This is not a polished modern institution. It's a band of volunteers, a lot of them thrill seekers, mavericks, men who don't fit neatly into conventional units.
Translation: if you were difficult and also competent, someone might hand you a steering wheel and a bag of explosives.
Right? There's an edge to that. It produces innovation. It also produces chaos. And Mayne is both the product and the catalyst.
Let's talk about his reputation for discipline, or the lack of it. There are stories of him being, how do we put this, passionately uninterested in military niceties.
That's one way. Another way is he could be drunk, belligerent, and destructive. There are accounts of him getting into fights, smashing things, and generally being the sort of officer who makes administrators sweat.
Imagine being the guy whose job it is to file paperwork for explain to Captain Mayne that we are not allowed to punch fellow officers. Again,
And yet, the unit keeps him, because in the field he's extraordinary.
it's the classic dilemma. What do you do with a brilliant person who is also a walking hazard sign?
And then there's the incident that becomes part of SAS lore. Mayne's anger, his volatility, colliding with the internal politics of the unit. There's a moment early on where he's nearly expelled. The story has variations, but the theme is consistent. He crosses a line, and the consequences almost catch him.
But he doesn't get thrown out, because the war doesn't care if you're polite. The war cares if you can do the job.
Exactly, and in the desert, Mayne does the job.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second. When we talk about special operations, people love the gear, the mystique, the silent professionals vibe. But early special operations in World War II were messy, experimental, and fueled by personalities.
Big personalities.
Mayne's story is a reminder that a lot of legendary units were built by men who were not, normal.
Not normal is a kind way to say it. He's a man who seems to run on extremes. Absolute calm one moment, absolute storm the next.
Which makes you wonder, what's under that hood? Because you don't get that kind of intensity out of nowhere.
This is where we have to be careful. We're not diagnosing a man from a century away, but we can observe patterns. Many accounts suggest Mayne had deep mood swings, periods of warmth and charm, periods of rage and recklessness. And after the war, those patterns don't exactly get better.
War is a place where certain traits, like fearlessness and aggression, are rewarded. Then the war ends, and suddenly those same traits are, what? A problem you're expected to file away neatly?
Exactly, but we're not there yet. Back to the war.
The SAS evolves. It's not just North Africa forever. The unit expands, changes, gets reorganized. Sterling isn't always in the picture. People come and go, and Mayne rises.
At times, he takes on greater command responsibilities, which is fascinating because leadership at that level requires not just courage, but judgment. And Mayne, for all his volatility, can plan and execute complex raids.
That's the paradox. The guy who might punch a wall can also lead a sophisticated operation in enemy territory.
And it's not just about blowing things up. SAS operations involve reconnaissance, coordination, working with local resistance at times, navigating landscapes where one wrong turn means you vanish.
And they often work at night, under pressure, with limited support. No big backup. No call-in air support like you're playing a video game.
And yet, They repeatedly inflict damage out of proportion to their size.
Let's talk about the myth-making machine, because the SAS and Maine become part of a narrative. The daring raiders, the elite band, the men who strike like lightning.
Some of that is real, and some of it is the way humans process chaos. We compress it into heroic stories with clear protagonists. Maine becomes a protagonist because he is undeniably central.
And because he's dramatic, the man has main character energy.
He does. But there's also the moral weight. War stories often get polished, the edges get sanded down, but Maine's edges are hard to sand.
Because some of the things attributed to him are difficult. There are accounts that suggest he could be ruthless toward enemy prisoners. There are claims and counterclaims, and the fog of war mixes with memory and legend.
That's one reason Maine remains such a debated figure. People who admire him emphasize his courage, his effectiveness, his leadership, and the extreme context of desert raiding. People who criticize him point to the allegations of brutality and his violent temperament.
And both sides are wrestling with the same uncomfortable truth. A person can be heroic in one context and deeply troubling in another.
That's history. It refuses to behave like a simple movie script.
Which is ironic, because Maine's life feels like it should be a movie script.
Now, as the war moves into Europe, the SAS and similar units play roles in different theaters, supporting advances, harassing enemy lines, working behind the front. The romantic image of desert jeeps becomes something else, a more complex, shifting kind of special warfare.
And Maine stays relevant. That's important. Some people are only suited for one kind of warfare. Maine adapts.
He's awarded high honors during the war. His actions are recognized repeatedly.
Which raises a question people still argue about. Did he receive the recognition he deserved? Some say he was undercredited at the very top tier. Others say the system did what it does, reward some, overlook others, get tangled in politics.
And this brings us to a key point. Recognition in war is never purely about merit. It's about paperwork, witnesses, timing, personalities, and sometimes whether the right person likes you.
And Maine, for all his qualities, was not exactly built to be liked by bureaucracy.
He's the guy who wins battles and loses meetings.
I feel that in my soul.
So by the end of World War II, Maine is a legend among his peers, feared by enemies, admired by many, and also carrying whatever he's been carrying.
And now comes the part of the story that always hits me hardest. What happens when the war ends?
Because for some men, the war is not just an event. It becomes the structure of their identity. It gives them purpose, adrenaline, brotherhood, a clear sense of right and wrong, or at least a clear sense of mission.
And when that disappears, the silence is loud.
Maine returns to civilian life. He tries to resume law, but the stories suggest he struggles. The energy that made him effective in war doesn't translate neatly into peacetime.
Peacetime has lines, paperwork, restraint. It's the opposite of kicking down a door in the desert at 2 a.m.
There's an emotional undertone in many accounts, a sense that he never fully found a place after the war. The man who could lead raids and inspire men in chaos is now asked to fit into ordinary life.
It's like taking a hurricane and asking it to be a ceiling fan.
And then in 1955, he dies in a car accident, only 40 years old.
40. That's honestly shocking every time I say it out loud, because he feels like a figure from another era, like he should have lived into old age and become a grizzled storyteller.
Instead, he becomes frozen in time, young, intense, controversial, legendary.
So, what do we do with a figure like Paddy Mayne? Because he's not a clean hero, but he's also not a simple villain. He's something else.
I think the honest answer is, we sit with the complexity. We acknowledge the courage and the impact. We don't flinch from the darker allegations and the violent reputation. We recognize that war amplifies traits, and that special operations, especially early special operations, sometimes relied on men who were difficult to contain.
And we also recognize something else. The origin stories of elite units often include men like Mayne, people who would be a disaster in normal structures, but thrive in the cracks, where improvisation and audacity matter.
And those cracks can produce miracles and tragedies.
There's also something very human about how he's remembered. Some people need him to be a pure hero. Some people need him to be condemned. But history usually hands us people who are mixed.
Mayne reminds us that bravery and brutality can share the same body. that leadership can exist alongside volatility, that a man can be adored by comrades and feared for his temper,
and that the price of being built for war can be not knowing how to live without it.
which is one reason this story stays evergreen. Not because we'll ever repeat the exact same war or the exact same desert raids, but because we keep repeating the same human problems, what we celebrate, what we excuse, what we demand from people in crisis, and what we do with them afterward.
Also evergreen because it's a reminder that sometimes the people who change history are not tidy.
Not tidy at all.
If you had to sum up Paddy Mayne in one sentence,
I'd say he was a force of nature that helped invent modern raiding warfare, and he might have been dangerous to everyone, including himself.
I'd say, imagine if a rugby captain got handed a mission to destroy an airfield, and the universe said yes, and also give him rage like a thunderstorm.
That's honestly pretty accurate.
And I think that's why people keep coming back to him, because he's not just a soldier, he's a question about heroism, about violence, about what a person becomes when they're unleashed.
And about how societies remember people who did necessary things in terrible times.
Necessary is doing a lot of work there.
It is, and it should. History should make us do work.
Chuck, if you and I were in the early SAS,
We would have been fired immediately.
I would have been assigned to morale, which is a euphemism for please stop talking.
And I would have been tasked with logistics, which is a euphemism for you are not allowed near explosives.
Meanwhile, Paddy Mayne would be like, I have devised a plan, and the plan is just sprinting at the problem.
And somehow it works.
Until it doesn't.
And that's the story. That's
That's
it for today's episode of the History AI podcast. If you made it this far, you are officially part of the crew.
We appreciate you. More than an overloaded Jeep appreciates a clear desert horizon.
Remember, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review. It genuinely helps the podcast grow. Those 5 stars are like rocket fuel for us.
And share the show with a friend who loves history, or a friend who needs to learn that being intense is not the same as being effective. Paddy Mayne is your cautionary tale and your legend in one.
If you've got an episode topic you want us to cover, reach out to us on social media. We love hearing from you, and your suggestions shape where we go next.
And check out the new merchandise. There's a link in the show notes. Become a walking advertisement for your excellent taste.
Special thanks to all our listeners, new and long time, for spending your time with us. We're seriously grateful.
Rate, subscribe, and share. And if you're feeling generous, make it a 5-star review. Help the podcast grow, help more people find these stories, and keep history
Until
real.
next time,
Stay curious,
and stay kind to your local bureaucrat.
especially if Paddy Mayne is in the building.
A Belfast boy with a storm in his chest. Law books open, but he never could rest. Rugby boots and a wild man's grin. Fists like thunder, trouble within. War came knocking, he didn't wait. Signed his name and sealed his fate. From the streets to the desert flame, they'd whisper low. Paddy Mayne didn't follow orders, didn't play it safe. Kicked down hell with a crooked face. He's a ghost of the SAS, riding through the night, engines roaring loud in the desert moonlight, blowing up the sky where the enemy sleeps. A rebel with a cause that he never could keep. No medals could hold what he gave away. A war-torn soul they couldn't save. Yeah, he burned like fire they couldn't contain. The legend of Paddy Mayne. The legend of Paddy Mayne. David Sterling saw the fire in his eyes, said, "You're the kind that never complies."